Hello and welcome to the technical video for the Sony FS5 Camera, which is the principal camera you'll be using in year one. My name's Piers Lee, I'm the lecturer for cinematography and I'll be leading your teaching when it comes to cinematography and camera work throughout the 3 years of your undergraduate degree. So basically this camera is a 4K camera, but we only tend to shoot on HD because of the workflow for post-production and editing. So I'm going to run you through this in various stages, and the first thing to start with is the orientation of the camera itself. So you have a handle on the right hand side of the lens, and there's various buttons on there that we'll come to later on. You also have a control button, which I can show you here to help you with the menu. And if you go to the other side, this is where you have the control settings for the audio, but also for the ISO and exposure, iris, neutral density, and your white balance, which we'll come on to a bit later on. But the first thing to start with is putting in the battery, putting in the card, making sure that your clock is set, and then formatting the card with the correct clip naming format on it. So the battery, very simply, if you look at it here, you'll see that there's some copper pins, copper sockets that match a pin in the camera. That goes into the back like so. To remove it, there's a release button here, just to the back of the small viewfinder, and if you press on that and then you push up on the battery, it will come out. So the battery goes in and down to lock, press and release. Okay, so the battery is in. Now you want to turn the camera on. So if you look on this side of the camera, you have a switch just above where it says 4K. There's a switch here. Back towards the back of the camera is off, forward is on. So we switch that on and you'll see now the viewfinder starting to come up, and you should actually be seeing the various menu settings on the screen behind me. So first things first, when these cameras are left switched off, quite often the clock will reset. Now, the clock's really important because it helps you identify in the edit when your material was shot. So, for instance, if you are shooting Tuesday the 3rd of July, 2025, you can then search through your edit and find the clips by the date. But the other thing that's really important is that if you don't check the clock, you might have got it from another group, or let's say you were filming in the UK and then flying to the US and you've changed time zones. If you don't change the clock, the edit will be looking for those clips in the wrong place, because they might actually, you might have been filming at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the US, but the time code is telling you that, or the clock is telling you that it's actually being filmed the following day. So just be very aware that it is a very, very important first step. So if you go and have a look on the side of the camera that has the audio controls and the on and off switch, you'll see there's various buttons. Just here, just to the left of where it says XD Cam, XAVC, you have a button called menu. So if we press that menu button, you'll come to the menu, and you can control this primarily through the button that's on the dial that is a control button. If you put your hand in, you'll feel it just under your thumb, and it's just to the left of the function button, which has the number 5 on it. So if I go through this now, and you can see it on the back here, the first thing to look for is to go all the way down and find the clock set, which is on the bottom menu. It looks like a little sort of chest of drawers as the icon, and if we go down here, you'll see clock set and area set. So the area set is your obviously GMT, because we're in the UK. Clock set, Lisbon, London is the time zone, summertime is off, and then if you go down, you just make sure that the date is correct. We're filming here on the the 12th of February 2025, so that's correct. But the time here is 2:14, and if I just check the time, that's correct, so I'm happy with that. So now I'm happy that the clock is set. I want to now insert the card and I want to format that card. So if you take your SD card here, you'll see at the back of the camera there's actually a flap which pops open like so, and the SD card goes into slot A, and normally the label on it is facing towards the battery. So now you've put the card in, you need to format that, and that's really important because you may put a card in that you think's empty, but if it has footage from the previous user, it's going to mean that you run out earlier than you expect, and also when you come to downloading the footage, you're going to be downloading all their footage as well. So always, once you put the card in, let's clear it. And the way we do that is we go to the menu button, and we go down to, again, the icon looks like a chest of drawers. It's the bottom icon. We go across to the right, we go all the way down, and we end up with media format. Okay, so let's go card A, format, all data will be deleted, and we go across to OK. We activate that, and you'll see that this icon is now coming across and deleting. So the next steps would be to make sure that our base settings are correct. And what that is important for is that in the UK we tend to use 25 frames per second. And that's based on the fact that our electrical cycle in the UK is 50 Hertz. If you shoot at 25 frames per second in the UK, you won't see any flickering. If you took the setting of 25 frames per second and went to America, where they have a 60 Hertz cycle, you'd get flicker, and that's why they shoot at 30 frames per second in America. So we need to set the camera up to operate in the UK, so we want to use 50th of a second as a cycle, and we want to use 25 frames a second. So the way that we do that, now that that formatting has happened, we can click OK. We can go back into menu, and we can go across again from the same menu at the bottom icon on the menu, and we go all the way down, and the first thing we set is the area setting in terms of 50 or 60th. So you'll see here 60i, 50i select. That's to do with the electrical current of the UK. Change to 60i. No, I want to be on 50, so that's fine. Again, if I press that button, it'll ask me if I want to change, and it says basically if you change, then the camera's not going to see the 50i footage, so we want to make sure we leave it in 50i. The next thing we need to do is go out of that menu and go and check that our frames per second are set at 25 frames per second. So now we've set it to operate at 50i as the base setting so that it's going to work properly in the UK. We go across and we go all the way up to the camera, to the icon that is like two arrows for input and output. We go to record set and we check the settings here. And we're going to check here that it's at 25 frames a second, and we're going to check that the file format is XAVC HD. So that's the format, and then also the frames per second that we're recording. There are other options. AVC HD is a lower quality of codec or compression, and if you're interested to learn about codec, then you can refer to the technical video we've got on general principles for filming and using a camera. XAVC QF HD is 4K, and we ask you to avoid that because when it comes to the editing, you're going to absolutely gunk up your work stream. So XAVC HD is the correct setting. Go down, we want it to be 1080, 25p, 50 megabits a second. Okay, there are various other settings here. There's 50p, 50i. There's also smaller codecs like 35 megabits a second. Ignore all of those. The one that you want is this one here, 1080p, 25p, 1080, 25p, 50 megabytes a second. So the next thing we want to set is the time code. So again, if we press the menu button and we toggle through to the icon that has the time code settings, you've got time code, display, preset, and so on. So we want the time code UB display to be on TC for time code. We want the time code run to be set not to record run. I always recommend doing it at time of day. So if we go to free run, you'll see that now the time code in the top right hand corner is running continually. If we go to time code preset, we can actually set that to the current time of day. So I'm going to check it's 14:30. So we're going to just dial that in. The advantage of using time of day time code is that you always know when you were filming something, and it's good to log that as you go through your project on a day-by-day basis, maybe on your call sheet or your shot list. And it means that that will relate to the clocked information as well. So now you're bringing it all together, and you'll see now in the top right-hand corner, it's running on the current time of day. However, the FS5 doesn't have a way to set the clip data naming. So that makes it even more important to double check that your clock is set to the correct time and the correct day. Because if you are editing with a time of day time code, you might film on 2 or 3 separate days, and they might be filming around the same time. You can confuse the edit in this way. But if the metadata, i.e. the information associated with the clip about the day and time, is individual, it will separate it out. So it's really important. If you are running time of day time code, which makes it much easier to record when things were filmed, you must have the clock and the date set properly. So the next thing we're going to look at is focus. If we take the camera, it's not very easy to see an image with the lens cap on, so we take that off. You want to pinch the lens cap, take it off, and then you can actually take the hood, turn it round and put it on. Now, lens caps go missing. Don't put it in a pocket because you'll walk off set and take it with you. These always go back in the camera bag, then you know exactly where it is. So, in terms of focus, there's a couple of things to think about. You obviously, on the lens, you have a zoom control which zooms the image in and out, and you can see I'm doing that here, pointing at the light. You also have a focus dial as well. And what we always use is a peaking setting which helps you establish where the focus is. So if I point, for instance, at this screen and I make it out of focus, you'll see that the image is quite blurry. However, I can use peaking here, which is where you see these red markers suddenly appearing, and that's showing me what's in and out of focus. Okay, so the peaking is a focus assistance guide. It's very easy to switch on and off. If you go and press the menu button here, and you go to the icon that looks like a monitor, go across, go to peaking. There are various settings on this. You can turn it on or off. And you can also set it to red or white or even yellow. I often use red just because it's very easy to read, especially if you're outside and it's very bright. If I'm working indoors, I'll often switch it to white because you see contrast more easily in those conditions. So you should play around with it. You can also set whether it's on high, middle or low. I'm going to leave it on high. So that is the peaking, which I'm going to leave on, and that's how you make sure that your image is in focus. So the next thing to do is expose the image correctly, and if you go to the video on general principles of camera work, there's a lot more detail in there. But there are effectively three elements that we're going to use on this camera to control exposure. There is shutter, there is ISO, and there's aperture. Now, if we look at shutter first, the camera is effectively at 25 frames per second, open for half the time and closed for half the time. So in a second, at 25 frames per second, it's actually only open for a 50th of a second, and that's what the shutter is, 1/50th of a second. Now, all of the settings, including shutter, can be turned on and off for auto. So if you go into the side of the camera here, you will see shutter, which is just to the left of the dial, and the menu button. And if you press that twice, it will go to auto. If you press it once again and then click select set, it goes back to manual. Don't use any of the exposure settings on auto, okay? It will ride the image through lighter and darker, and it will make the image absolutely impossible to use in post-production. So we always want manual settings on these. So shutter is a 50th of a second. Now, you can change the shutter. You can go higher or you can go slower. The problem is it does affect the image. If you go higher, so say 250 or 500, it makes the image a lot sharper. And actually, we're used to seeing a bit of blur in the movement. If you go slower on the shutter, so you're shooting at 25 frames per second, but your shutter is a 12th of a second, then the image becomes more blurry. Now, you may want to use that as effect. You may want to use a high shutter speed if you're filming a fast-moving car. But as a matter of principle, you only want to shoot at a 50th of a second on 25 frames per second. The only exception to that would be if you were filming in America and you were filming at 25 frames per second, you would have to set the shutter to a 60th, otherwise the image would strobe. Likewise, if you were an American crew coming to the UK and you're shooting at 30 frames per second, you'd need to shoot a 50th, otherwise the electricity will make the image strobe. So we can't use shutter effectively to control your exposure, which is very different to photography, or stills photography, where you use shutter all the time to control it. So let's put the shutter to one side. The other two tools that you have are ISO and your iris or your aperture. So in terms of ISO, all of these cameras have what's known as a base ISO. That is, there is a base condition for the sensor that is optimal for its operation. And on these cameras, the FS5, there are some that are 800, there are some that are 1000 ISO. Now, you can use ISO to control the brightness of the image. The problem with it is that you're adding noise into the image, so you're affecting the image. You'll particularly see that in very dark areas. So if I look at this image here on the screen behind me, and I add some extra brightness in, you think, well, oh, the image looks much brighter, it's much nicer. But when you get to post-production, especially the blacks will have a lot of noise in them, and the image will look absolutely horrible. So I, again, would encourage you to avoid using ISO to control your exposure. If you're outside, you need to control the exposure using something called ND, which is built into the camera here, and that's a neutral density filter. It's on the dial here, the silver dial at the front, and when you wind through, you'll see that the image behind me becomes darker. And that basically doesn't change any color or any information that's coming to the camera in terms of making it bluer or warmer or whatever. It just controls the amount of light. It's literally like putting a pair of sunglasses on. If you're filming inside and you're in dark conditions, you can't use ND because it's for darkening the image, not brightening it, and that's when you'll be tempted to add the ISO. But on the whole, you should try and avoid adding ISO and try and think about, switching lights on or using practical lights and starting to think about lighting. So, shutter, we can't really use to help our exposure. Again, ISO, I would discourage you from using it as well. You can, however, with ISO, go into the menu and control what your base settings for the ISO are. So if you press menu and then you toggle up to the camera icon and go across, you'll see ISO gain select. And this camera is currently on gain. I would recommend changing that to ISO. It makes it a bit easier to use. And then if you go into ISO set, you have the presets in there. So H is set, the high setting is 2500, the medium setting is 2000, and the low setting is 800, which is probably the correct settings. You can probably get away with going to 3200. The noise won't be horrendous, but it will be there. Now, if you need to use it for a scene, that's fine, but just bear in mind, if you're switching in the same scene between 800 ISO and 3200 ISO, when you edit it, the shots are never going to match. So if you're going to start on an ISO that's slightly higher because you need a bit more light, you need to shoot the whole scene in that ISO, or you'll cause yourself problem in the edits. Okay, so now that I've gone in and I've okayed that, I'm going to turn the menu off, and you'll see here on the ISO flickable switch, if I just, it's currently set onto auto, so I want to turn it off auto by pressing the ISO gain button, and then I can control 800, 2000 or 3200, which is my top setting. However, I would once again encourage you to stick to your base setting, which is 800 ISO, or sometimes on these cameras 1000 ISO, and not fiddle with that too much. So the final setting that you have to control your exposure is your aperture. And that is controlled here on the side of the camera. You have your iris setting here, and you have a dial that enables you to change the iris with the dial here. So as you'll see here, the moment you'll see here the shutter setting has an A next to it. That's because it's auto. So we want to make sure that we're always on manual setting. You can also change the iris on using this button here, and you can make that automatic, and you can even make the ISO automatic, but just avoid that. Let's do it in manual. So to turn off the automatic shutter, you press the shutter button here, and then you click on select set, and then now that's on manual. So can't use shutter to control the exposure. Try to avoid the ISO to control the shutter, and that leaves you with the aperture, which you can dial in. The only thing you must be aware of is if you're using the aperture, you're changing the quality of the image, because you're changing the depth of field, and that will affect the look on the image. But as a matter of principle, that's going to be your primary use of exposure, is the aperture in combination with the neutral density filters, which are this silver dial here. If we go back into the menu and we scroll across to white balance preset, we can actually change it from indoor or outdoor, or we can have a manual white balance temperature. So I tend to use manual white balance, and I go to white balance set, and you could set that for either, remember, if you go back to the general principles of shooting with camera, daylight is around 5600. So if you're going to be shooting outside, then you would use that. If you want to shoot inside, you probably want to go to either 4300, which is a mix, or 3200, which is tungsten or indoor. So you can use presets for the white balance, and remember, it's really important that you think about your white balance when you're shooting. If you shoot the primary light source is daylight from a window, and there is a lamp on that's very, very warm, it might look nice, but if you're trying to adjust that and warm it up or cool it down, the light is going to be really affected when you come to grading. So in principle, you try to avoid mixing light as much as possible. So you can use the presets and you can dial that in and control it very specifically. Or the other technique that you can use is by using a white sheet of paper or a white balance card. And what you would do is you would put that down and you would frame up on it and make sure you zoom in so the whole area is covered. And then on the front of the camera, just here, there's a button that says WB set. So you can't do this on the preset, you have to be on A or B. You point at the white card, you press and hold, and it will take a reading. And you'll see if I do it again, it's reading down here. B is 5,300. So that is taking a white reading off the card. That's quite a useful tool to use if you're out and about and you want to make sure, but you have to also be careful because if there are greens or magentas or other colours in there, it can make the whole image look very skewed indeed. So just be aware of using that too much. The basic principle is, how does the image look? If it looks nice and you'd be happy to have it on your telly, then it's fine. Don't try and overcomplicate it at this point. We are trying to get you familiar with the cameras, out working and shooting, and you'll start to pick it up as you go along because, as I said in my general principles of camera video, camera work is experiential. You only learn by doing it. So people are often asking me about exposure. How do you know that it's exposed correctly? As a general matter of principle, what I say is, does the image look nice and would you be happy to have that on your television? If it's looking too bright and burnt and washed out, it's going to look ugly. If it's looking too dark, you're not going to see anything. So you want to try and balance it and avoid having too big a contrast, you know, pointing straight at windows and trying to see people's faces when they're silhouetted against it. You have to look at the image and try and think, oh, how does that actually look? Just take a moment to think about what the image looks like. And if the very bright areas are too burnt out and you're not seeing any detail, it's not properly exposed. Likewise, if the dark areas are too dark and you're not seeing any detail, it's not properly exposed. But there is a tool that you can use, which is Zebra, which if I press and hold the menu button here and go across down to the monitor and then go down to Zebra, I can set it. And as you can see, Zebra 1 level is 100% here. Zebra 2 level is 75%. So what you would do is you would use this as an indicator of, let's put it on Zebra 2, you will get lines on the screen that indicate roughly where the exposure is relative to skin tone. It can be quite tricky because people have all different kinds of skin tones. I would probably avoid it as a matter of principle. Perhaps try using it now and then and see how it compares and helps you with the exposure because you want it to kind of not be on human skin on the whole. But as a matter of principle, I would just say, think about whether or not the exposure looks nice. Is that an image you'd be happy to have on your TV? Is it too bright? Are you seeing too many whites in the area, especially if you're pointing towards windows? Or is it too dark? Are you seeing too little detail? You cannot fix that too much in post because you're just going to make the image look really horrible. So as a matter of principle, although Zebra is there as a tool, I would tend to turn it off and I would just use the guiding light of check that you are happy with the image and that it looks good and don't worry too much about all the intricacies of using Zebra and exposure guides.